Hello, and welcome to Two Crones and a Microphone. I am Linda.
I am Betty.
And here I am. This is Sally.
We are cultural midwives. Our podcast is about sharing wisdom through storytelling and research from us as experienced crones and friends. We offer experiences and spiritual practices for body, mind, emotion, and spirit to meaningfully connect you with our beautiful earth, to walk your talk, and to act from your heart's desire instead of fear.
Yeah, today's podcast is about fire as a healing element. And when we first decided to talk about fire, it was actually in the fall. And who knew that fire was going to be such, I am going to use this word on purpose, lightning rod for this time.
Mm.
Because when we look around our world right now, the energy of fire is showing its face everywhere. Most obviously, we've all heard about and seen the devastation of the fires in California. And of course, the fires that were a secondary effect to all of the hurricanes, the hurricane, as it hit all of the states earlier in the winter. We want to explore thoughts about fire. And in this podcast, our focus is on the healing aspects of fire. In our next podcast, we are going to look more at looking at the coping strategies and the more challenging aspects of fire.
Mhm.
In its aspect of change, and sometimes we describe that, of course, as destruction. That can also open us up to the healing aspects of fire and how to manage all those changes. So we'll be sharing Oshana practices and teachings on fire and to help and to heal and working with the fire of the light within all of us. But we'll talk more about that later.
But before we get started, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, which would be the Minerva Educational and Wellness Treatment Center, Franny's Photography, and of course, our listeners who have contributed to this podcast financially. We really appreciate that. If you'd like to join them, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the button that allows you to send us a few dollars each month. We'd really appreciate it. Linda?
Here are three topics for this podcast, and we're going to be doing a deep dive on them. But first, we're going to just briefly describe what's coming up. So, guess what? Fire is alive, just the way you might want to get to know more about a friend or a neighbor. You can observe and interact with fire. So, I will discuss a little bit later on about Year of the Wood Snake. The wood snake is a yin or feminine fire snake. And that's very exciting. And that's according to Chinese astrology. So more on that later. Betty?
I'm going to focus on Brigid. All right. As most of you know, I'm Irish, mostly Irish. There's a
Yep.
few other things in there. But because of that, Brigid's always been someone that I've turned to. And she has an eternal flame. And that eternal flame has been going for a long time. And we will talk about that. We're also going to talk a little bit in the next podcast about how to help someone in a disaster. All right. We each have very, very different perspectives on fire, and you'll hear us share our stories on it. Sally?
I know, and I'm going to talk a little bit about fire as a game changer through history and
Hmm.
all of the healing aspects of fire and what things we use fire for. So we'll look at that and also about some of the aspects of sacred fire or fire in the tradition that was taught to us by Oshana.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's dive in because guess what? Fire is deeply transformational. It represents the spark of life within each of us. And this is across a broad range of traditions. Many traditions have stories about fire, and we still celebrate seasonal fire festivals. Think about the fire in the sun itself, the way it returns in the seasonal cycle. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, for example, we celebrate the winter solstice as the longest night, the least amount of fire. And then we get to celebrate a different aspect of it in the summer. Summer solstice is the longest day and the sun reigns in that day. And anyhow, all of us are familiar with those ideas, but they were tied back to several ancient traditions that honored the spirit of the fire externally, which would warm us, but the fire within each of us, which is that spark of life. That spark of the sacred is the way I think of it. So this does, by the way, happen to be Year of the Wood Snake, and in the Chinese tradition, and it's a year about vital transformation. I think we can all align with that, about the yin or feminine energies. And then the feminine fire is in part, we're going to go into this more, the aha moment. You know, when you get that spark of inspiration, that's the feminine fire. And also sometimes, you know, we feel kind of empty. We haven't quite filled our cups in our daily life, but then all of a sudden we might see something or spark something that fills us up. That's also an element of the feminine fire. And I guess it distills down to the light and the heart, and the light within the heart. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about in, if you'd like to know more, for Year of the Snake and the Feminine Wisdom Stories and Feminine Fire, we're going to be talking about the Year of the Snake, the Feminine Fire, the Heart Fire, in a class that we're going to be doing on minervaed.com. You can join us for the live class on Sunday, the 23rd of February, or the class is going to be recorded. So you'll be able to download that whenever you like. Okay, let's take a deep dive. Think broadly. What do you know about fire? What have you experienced about fire? We've all had experience with fire. And so it is, for example, the internal element in a volcano, where originally the various goddesses of fire, think Pele on the Hawaiian Islands, for example, that's where they regenerated the souls of the dead. And they were never burnt, but they were in a constant state of bliss. They were being supported after a long and fruitful life. So fire can be accessed as well in the mental mind and physical. That could be sensual, sexual energies. That can be the heart. It can be a visionary focus. Those are all fire aspects. And finally, in our spiritual bodies. And so just tune in. Where does that spirit of fire reside within you? Ask your body, ask your spirit, your emotions, yourself that question. That's a really interesting question. We can notice where that spiritual flame, sacred flame resides. And by the way, it may reside in one spot, but it flows throughout our bodies. And so it's lighting a divine fire in passionate body, mind, spirit alignment. And that comes with inspiration and desire. We may have the will to do something, but fire helps carry it forward. It's a very energetic element. So maybe that brings about adventure, change, life direction. All kinds of things are possible. Maybe it's the desire to be different or be remembered for something, be a path maker, a way shower, a change agent. And guess what? The other thing about fire, it breaks the rules. Forget about it. Forget about the rules. So for those of us that have a little rebellious nature in us and we want to apply that, call on that inner fire. That's all I can say. Sometimes the rules do need to be broken in order to affect a better, greater change. So mental fire, as I said before, is that aha moment that strikes the illuminating thought. And also, there's a steady flame. It's about concentration and focus and really honing in and getting some task or some important thing done. There's also a fire, and Betty, you're going to talk about this a little bit with Brigid. There's a fire that's lit that's about knowledge and wisdom and devotion. So there are so many places where this can go. So what are some of your individual experiences with what I just said?
Well, I have to tell you, the thought that came to me is
Uh-huh.
menopause. Menopause, man.
I love it.
Talk
Yes,
about fire and talk about
yes,
change. I mean,
yes.
that's a whole new podcast, but that's the
Oh,
first
yeah.
thing that came to me. Oh
Oh,
my God, talk about fire.
yes,
Ah,
yes, yes,
anyway,
yes.
that was really the
That's
first thing that occurred to me when you were speaking, Linda.
That's
that's
Um,
great.
that is funny because I went to a totally different direction,
Yeah.
thinking about all the fiery people I know. People
Oh,
that have passion
yes.
and creativity, and you just, when you're around them, you're uplifted, you're enlightened, and their fire, their personality. I am using air quotes for those of you who are on the pod listening to the podcast and not on YouTube,
Yeah,
because they energize and spark passion and excitement or rebellion,
sure.
because fiery, passionate people can also tick you off and
Mhm.
make you go,
yeah.
right? So I started thinking about all those people I know in my life who are those kinds of people. And, sometimes I can be a little bit that kind of person. But I was thinking more in term for myself, more in terms of that point in my life when I learned to really connect with that flame inside myself
Mhm.
and realize that I could actually warm my body when I connected to that flame and
Yeah.
brought it throughout myself, that I could actually be warm when it was cold. But that's a whole nother lengthy story. I would just say that my aha moment for myself was, oh, I really can do this.
I
Hmm.
I love that. And for me, it's the alignment with realizing that almost fire is a friend. Once I got to know it and the way it behaved, and that was through years of different things, practices like candle gazing or building a fire and calling in the spirit of fire within me and within the flame that's in the campfire, let's say. And, you can have real conversations with that spirit of fire. And we're going to go into that a little more later. Huh. Well, Betty, what would you
Hmm.
take it up on?
Um, fire, you need fire for change. There's just no question about it. All right. It's an alchemical process when you're using fire. It really is. It helps burn away that which we are ready to release.
Beautiful. Yes.
And women as teachers, healers, family, friends, it's interesting when we all get together and we start really talking about things or have passion about things. You can see the fire. You can actually see it, you know. You're igniting the divine fire within. It's interesting. I mentioned menopause before. I've been in a group of women where we're all around the same age going through the same thing. One has a hot flash, the next one has a hot flash. It would just go around the group,
Well,
right?
that's so funny. I love
But
it.
it's true, it happens.
Yeah.
So it's deeply transformative. It really is, because it just changes your inner landscape. All right, we're talking about body, mind, spirit here, and it does change, and it changes you if you allow that to happen. And if you develop a relationship with fire, you have even greater transformation. Um, One of our teachers, Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki, taught us quite a bit about fire and how important that it is and how it can change us. And I thank her for the knowledge that she gave us with
Mhm.
that. We have different kinds of fire, right? We have the Olympic flame, they keep that going. We have, of course, the flame at um, Brigid's eternal flame. That was lit like in pagan times when Brigid was a pagan goddess, right?
Mhm.
It was put out years later, centuries later. However, she's now a saint, right? They transform people into saints, and she existed. She was a good woman. There's a lot to know about her. I'm not going to go into that now, but she was an amazing woman. If you read about her, there's more and more information coming forth on her because the women in Ireland are promoting this. And her eternal flame was relit in the 90s.
Hmm.
And I have a theory that there were pieces of that fire from when it was put out that were still kept alive. There are many ways to keep that going. And I think, Sally, you're going to tell us a story about that, how Oceana taught us to carry fire from one actual fire from one place to the other, right? Here in this country, we have one of the eternal flames we have is at John F. Kennedy's grave.
Hmm.
That eternal flame is kept lit it keeps going to remind us of the spirit that he had. All right. If you go out to the cemetery frequently, and I'm one of them, we have these candles that are electronic that are lit by the graves at night. So you drive past at night, you have all these little flickering candles. It's really kind of pretty when you think about it. So I have one over by Larry's grave because he was one that never really liked the dark too much. So, okay, here you go, honey. Here's a little bit of a light for you, right?
Aw.
We ourselves have a practice when we're notified about someone who's crossing, we light a candle and we leave that lit overnight. So thank goodness for electronic candles, right? When I had an actual fireplace, I would light a candle and put it in there,
Hmm.
I had little doors I was able to close so it was safe. But now that I don't, I have a gas fireplace. So what I use is an electronic candle. So there are just many ways to keep that fire going, many, many ways. And it's significant of that burning. All right. It's significant of life, significant of the spirit. So I, for one, love my sacred fires. I love burning my candles.
Mhm.
Uh, Even though they're electronic, I love having them out at night. And in the winter, I have them all over the place because it gets dark so early and it's the light in the darkness, right?
Yeah.
So, Sally, you want to talk about fire as healer.
Yeah, and before I do that, but actually I think it's part of it. You were talking about fire and menopause, and I
Mm-hmm.
cut you off a little bit, so I was really glad you expanded on that. But when you were talking, it occurred to me this is how you make a crone,
Yeah.
Ah,
right? So
yes.
the fire that people have in the forms of hot flashes, this is what takes us from women
Mhm.
in their full power, reproductive power, into
Mhm.
Crohn's. Fire turns us into Crohn's. I don't know. Maybe
Love
I'm doing a
that.
stretch with that, but I just wanted to say
Oh,
this is what takes us from mature women who become, our queens and then become Crohn's. But anyways, I
you-
just went off on that for a minute. So
I
I love
no,
that.
I thought I
I
would jump in and go,
I
oh, the making of a
yes,
crone.
I totally agree. I
I do
totally agree. And
too.
let me just tell you why I agree with you. I remember going through all this, and honest to God, my hot flashes were horrible, just awful, like changing clothes, hot flashes.
Mm.
And I said to one of our sisters, I was like, Pat, I don't know what's going on with me, but I feel like I'm turning into another person. And she wisely looked at
So
me and
funny.
said, yes, you are.
Wow.
Beautiful. Love it.
That,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. Thank you. So I went off on that when you were talking, and thanks for bringing that back around because, we talk about fire as a healer, and I think it's easy to see that aspect of fire that is seen as more, I don't know, destructive or change worthy. But fire has incredible healing properties. And if we look back through time, which I love to do, and so, that's oftentimes the piece I bring to things, but we can see how fire in its healing aspects and its positive aspects has changed life on this planet,
Oh yeah.
right? The control of, and I laugh when I use the word control, but I'll say control. The control of fire by early humans was really critical. It was a critical technology that enabled the evolution of us as human beings on the planet,
Mm.
right? Because fire provided a source of warmth and lighting and protection from predators, a way to create more advanced hunting tools because they were formed in fire.
Mm,
Many things are formed in fire.
awesome.
A way to create cooking the food, which brought in a whole different aspect of things, whether it was men who cooked at the time or women who cooked at the time, or the sharing of that, like we frequently do today. But and I love when I think about, grilling as a way of celebration with family,
Mm,
community, just downright fun. So um, that's a whole different way of looking at fire, right? These cultural advances that brought all kinds of things, cultural innovation, changes in diet, occasionally creating fire or additionally creating fire allowed activity to continue through the darker hours. I mean, you mentioned Betty lighting candles, particularly in the wintertime,
Mhm.
because those moments of light are, really different in those winter months. So having that opportunity to have candlelight or to have the warmth of a fire and people who would craft in the evenings in their cabins or in their teepees or their caves or wherever they were. I didn't realize until we were exploring this, preparing for the podcast, right? Our evidence of fire in the fossil records has been going on for 1 million up to 1.5 million years, right? Evidence
wow.
found around sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where we can really see evidence of fire going back that far.
Wow.
Some indications in the fossil record dated all the way back to 420 million years ago, which we knew was a really fire in the landscape,
Mm,
right? Not necessarily with people using fire, but fire in the landscape is in the fossil records. And we know that because of the levels of oxygen in the atmosphere, that there were a lot of fires, a lot of wildfires actually, that
mm,
were recorded in that time period because we can find it in the fossil record. We could find it in the levels of ice because of what's going on in the ice layers that come from glaciation. They can see that there were periods where fire existed on the planet. So we could go way, way, way back into the importance of fire on the planet in making the planet and then in helping us as human beings to advance to where we are today. So it's sacred in a lot of traditions. And for those of us who studied with ocean or other indigenous, teachers, learning to respect fire as an element, one of the sacred
Mhm.
elements, and to work with fire in a way that's sacred is a large part of the teaching that we all share. Fire is considered, as Linda said in the very beginning, fire is alive.
mhm,
So fire is considered to be a living energy that needs to be honored and respected, cared for, and in the case of a sacred fire, constantly tended to. Now, I'm not saying that those of us who have fireplaces or wood stoves don't tend to that fire and manage it and recognize both its healing aspects as well as the fact that if we don't tend fire, it can get carried away. So, um, we were taught that fire is a reflection of that sacred flame that Linda talked about in each of us, and to learn to connect to that flame that is our very essence that each of us has and holds within us. So we each have that spirit of divine, and many, many, many traditions talk about that divine spirit or that divine spark that we hold. I think it's probably true in every tradition that that's spoken about.
mhm,
So learning to tend that essence of the fire within is really important. And we, in this podcast, we really are here talking about managing the times and holding who we are in our essence and our core as sacred to manage and tend to that so that we can kind of make it through these times in a way that helps us to grow, right?
mm.
So I don't know, some of you may want to share your other, I mean, I do have one about moving fire, might want to share your own experiences in working with ocean or just in tending to our own eternal flames. I don't know if anybody wants to pop in and share your experience. I know we all have a lot of them actually.
Well, one of the things I want to share, and it just bubbled up as you were talking, is that when I've been able to be a firekeeper and, for a circle, let's say, of people gathered to work with fire or to gather inspiration or pray, then I feel like I do have a direct kinship with that fire. I not only look for the physical characteristics of when does it need stoked, or how does it need spread, or how will it be contained, but I'm also having a kind of internal dialogue with that fire to watch it and see the way the flames are moving, and watch and see if maybe the colors change, or there's any kind of a bright coal at the bottom that's especially dynamic. Sometimes they take shape and look like other things that are not fire. So it's a really wonderful thing. And I think it harks back, Sally, to what you're talking about. I think that going back for thousands of generations, we were aligned with fire more than we are today, because our heating systems provide it mostly. And those of us that are lucky enough to have worked with fire or have a fireplace can have a slightly different, maybe slightly more ancient relationship with a fire, like our deep ancestors.
One of the things that fire is so important to human beings, which we don't realize, is I know the military taught us how to start a fire using a flint.
Yeah.
And that's really, it was like, wow. And I remember when they were teaching us, I was thinking, I wonder who first figured this out. It's just like, that's where my mind goes, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I wonder how the people who discovered fire, was it a lightning strike that started a fire? And suddenly they realized that they could use the fire for other things. And then how did they keep it going? And, Oceana had us learn how to move fire from one place to the other. The coals, why they're still that's really important to do. So the person who had that designation in the ancient world, that was an important person, someone that you really trusted. And because if that fire went out, they really didn't know how to start another one. So it's just all these things that pop through your head when you're talking about fire and how important it actually is as an element. So it is to be honored, it's to be tended, but it's also an element that is to be wary of. You have to be on top of what's going on around.
It needs respect.
Absolutely. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct. It needs a lot of respect. And you know what? If you do that, the fire is going to honor it.
Yeah.
We have learned that many times.
Yeah. Well, and I have that story, which I'll keep short because it's a little bit of repetition. But we would do ceremony at night and keep that fire during the night and do sunrise ceremony to greet the sun in the morning. We still do these things, but one time I was out in the desert and I was one of the fire keepers, and we had this fire going out in the desert and it got incredibly windy. So the decision was made to keep the fire going, but to move it. So what does that mean? So we kept the fire going that was out in the desert, because you have to keep it going until it dies down and you can't put it out with water or any of those other things. But we moved those coals that you talked about, Betty. We moved those coals, and it was tricky, right? Because it had to be in a fireproof bucket. And so we were tending the fire while somebody else ran off, because it was a distance, ran off to get something that we could move it in with dirt in the bottom. And we kept that fire going during the night in a bucket.
Wow.
tended it closer to the house that we were all staying in.
Yes.
And then when we went out in the morning to greet the sun, we had to take that bucket with the coals still going and
Mm-hmm.
relight that fire in a good way or in a sacred way
Sure.
if we were to greet the sun in the morning. And it was challenging. It was an honor, right? And a privilege to keep that fire, even though it was crazy. It was in this like metal bucket that she had at her house. And so I think, all of those things teach us about the importance of maintaining that relationship with fire externally, but with the fire internally as well,
Thank
and the things
you.
to do to release that.
Yeah.
And, I know we're not going to talk in detail here, but we are going to, talk briefly about, fire can be used to release things that are no longer needed or wanted. And I know we're going to spend more time in the next podcast talking about that.
That's it.
But, that's
Yeah.
that's a great and really important thing that Oshna taught us to do as well.
So powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Betty.
Sorry, I had to mute myself because Luna was alerting me to the fact that someone's outside, which,
Oh,
yeah, my early warning system.
there you go.
So, you know, people are, I'm sure, at home and they're like, well, how can I experience this? I live in an apartment. Been there, done that, right? I live in an apartment and I have no access to this. But in this day and age, you actually do. Other than your electronic candle, one of the great things you can do is just go on YouTube. Let me see if I can pull that up. Now, for those of you who are on YouTube with me, you can see the fire, right?
Beautiful. And we're looking at a fire built in a curved arched fireplace with about 4 or 5 logs and flames blazing. It looks so inviting.
And,
And
and I can hear, so that fire on YouTube comes with all the crackling sounds of a real fire,
There we
because I can
go.
actually hear it on the podcast when you held it up, Betty.
Very nice. And this applies to our wisdom practice. Our wisdom practice for you this time is I'm going to guide you through lighting of a candle. And again, this may be a literal candle. I tend to use beeswax candles because they smell fragrant and so lovely and wonderful. And I feel like it's a nice alignment with all the work the bees do. But for those of you on YouTube, you can see I'm holding up an example of a candle with a lit candle here. And you also, in case it's easier for you or better, you can also use an electronic candle. Sally is holding hers up. It looks beautiful in that glass container.
I love these ones. My favorite thing was to go to, not that I meant to do a promotion for IKEA, but you can buy lots and lots and lots of these little candles or in a Dollar General or something
There we go.
for just a little bit of money that you can put in your
Well,
flame.
thank you. I'm going to take us through a very simple exercise. I want you to just hold one finger straight out in front of you and look at it almost as if you're going to the eye doctor. You're just going to look straight ahead. That's a direct focus. And now I'd like you to take 2 fingers, one on each hand, and separate it by about 6 inches. And I want you to just gaze, looking at both fingers at the same time. And you'll notice that the gaze is no longer pointed, it's actually broader. That's the diffuse focus or the soften your gaze that I'm going to be talking about. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, it's relaxing. It can be calming. It might give you information about yourself or questions you have that you're sort of pondering. And most importantly to me, it gives you a way to align with the spirit of fire within yourself or the light within your heart. And so just get that candle lit and then make sure that you're well grounded. Make sure you know our grounding practices. So make sure you're sitting in a grounded manner. Soften your gaze as I just described and gently gaze at the flame or the electronic candle for a minute or two. and just notice what occurs. Maybe you take a sigh, a relaxing breath. Maybe something else happens. Maybe you feel like you feel more relaxed in your body, but also that your perception expands a little bit. You might notice a little peripheral glow around the flame. You might even see something within the flame. So at that point, after a minute or two of just quiet gazing, just open your heart and ask that external flame to speak with your inner fire and let the fire transmute a belief and find the truth stored within it. And so that could be a question you're holding in your heart. It could be a question for guidance. It could be just a realignment between the flame of spirit within you and the way that we walk our lives. It can be any number of things. It can also be used before you go to sleep as a little bit of a sleep aid, because for me, it begins to drop me out of the chatter in my mind. It begins to get me in a little bit deeper, more focused place. Afterward, be sure to close by grounding or rinsing your hands and face just within a little bit of water. That's going to help get you grounded and back fully in your body. And so, there are so many things that can occur. Sometimes, different flames can look different colors all of a sudden. There'll be a blue or a violet or a gold, that orange that just really begins to blaze forth. Look at the light patterns, the resulting coals. If you're looking not at a candle flame, but at a fire, once the fire burns down, look at the resulting coals. Oceana taught us how to fire and coal gaze and read the fire. And we're all here to attest to the fact it can lead to relaxation and healing. And it's just such a special moment. I remember those moments because, again, they're more outside our normal living sphere, and they've been very meaningful to me. So, fire and flame gazing can help unlock your attention, ask questions, and expand your possible answers. Sometimes it's a way to open up different possibilities than those we see right directly in front of us.
I love that, Linda.
Me too. It's so true. So true. So we're getting ready to wind up here. And I just wanted to tell you, we've come up with 4 pillars that hold up 2 crones and a microphone. The first one is our touchstone, which is Oceana, of course, the way she lived her life, her teachings that we're sharing with you now. The second one, of course, is our own collective wisdom as Crones, which is pretty extensive. Our third one is the guests that we interview. We're always trying to bring guests to you that will bring joy, will bring entertainment, but also bring their wisdom to you. And of course, the fourth is you, our listening audience. You're our community, you're our people. So we thank you for helping to hold us up. It's really important. Again, you can go to twocronesandamicrophone.com for different blogs that sorry, Sally, blogs that Sally wrote, and further information on what we're talking about here. And we always want to hear what you think about our podcast and our wisdom practices. How have they affected you? And of course, we have that subscribe button. So don't forget to push that subscribe button and the donate button. We'd really appreciate that. Linda?
I'm gonna jump in just
Turn
for
it
a
over
second.
to Sally because
Yeah, I'm gonna
Oh,
jump in just for a
sorry.
second.
something. It's good. It's good.
Because, sometimes we have that question about what do we do if you can't really engage in the wisdom practice, or if there's something that comes up. So
Good
we've
question.
been talking about fire, and fire is not easy for everybody,
That's right.
right? We've been lucky to work with somebody who's really helped us embrace and engage that element of fire. But there are other people that say, ooh, not going there because when I think about fire, it brings up fear in me.
Mm.
And it may be because you've experienced a fire, watched a fire from a distance, been in a fire, maybe, your house burned down. And so looking at harmonizing with the element of fire just brings up all kinds of barriers. So you have an emotional response. So maybe this is not a relaxing strategy for you. And
Mm.
we just want to acknowledge that. And so, um, and suggest, we invite you to think about where your emotions are coming from, what those emotions are as they come up for you. Who do you have to talk to about that? I don't, maybe you're fortunate and you have a therapist or you have a really good circle of friends that you can go to with these things. So you go, oh, wow, I listened to that wisdom practice on two Crones and a microphone. And I just want to talk to you about it because that's not something I'm ever going to do. Are you guys going to do that? Because I have all these things that come up when I think about doing that wisdom practice. Even if it's an electronic candle, it can still bring up those same emotions when we think about,
Sure.
connecting to that energy that's a fire, even if it's an electronic energy.
Yep.
So we invite you to explore that because growth may come from even just acknowledging that and exploring that and saying, not a strategy that I'm ever going to do. And if you guys have done it, right? Because we do know people that listen to the podcast and talk with their friends about it. And so we invite you to continue with that group. You can email us your experiences. You can email us your questions, or go onto the one of the podcast Instagram or one of the other sites and bring that up. So because that too can bring across change, just to be able to reach out and talk about that. So if you see even that picture or that image that Betty showed on YouTube when she held her phone up, you might even have feelings that come up for you when she did that. My invitation always is to counter that with an experience that will help you control what happened. So if you're looking at fire and it feels out of control in your mind's eye or in your own mind, douse it with a bucket of water,
Mm.
put it out with a fire hose, something that you can do that allows you to take that emotion and bring it down into a way that you're actually containing it. And so if you use a candle, if you do decide to explore it, make sure it's one that has a battery or that you plug in so that if you decide you want to try this experience and those emotions come up for you, make sure that the candle that you use is one you can unplug or one you can switch the bottom off and turn it off so that you're the one that's in control of what you're experiencing.
That's such good advice, and I appreciate the care and thoughtfulness behind it. Yeah.
So,
Well, we're going to ask you to kindly spread the word, and please feel free to leave a rating or share this episode with family and friends. But here's why. I'm going to read a response that came privately saying, a friend introduced me to your podcast. This was from one of our new listeners. I love it. It makes me laugh and feel safe, like I'm listening to families sitting around the table after a nice big meal. It's great you're doing the YouTube now as well. So thank you for that wonderful shout out. We really appreciate it.
Mhm.
So we do want to invite you to subscribe to our podcast on your own podcast provider, and we'd love for you to leave a review on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and just tell us what's most memorable for you about this episode.
And on that note, I am going to remind you that one of the reasons we're here is to help you navigate the muddy waters of our time. And just know that I appreciate all of you. I really do. So thank you so much for listening to us.
Beautifully put. Yeah, we do this because we care. And Sally, what are we calling our next podcast?
oh,
Hmm.
that's a good one. Fire as a change agent
There
or
we
fire as an
go.
agent of change.
All right. excellent. Come listen more. And there we'll be talking about tools you can use to help deal with after effects of trauma and grief, anger, shock, and other practices around release. So remember, find your glimmer.
And I love it. We realize that when this podcast drops, it's going to be right by Valentine's Day. So we decided to do something. And I recognize that you're only going to see this if you're on YouTube, but we want you to hear it if you're listening to the podcast. We are pressing the react button on our Zoom, and we are sending you hearts, hearts with effect. So they're shiny hearts. And we discovered when we did this that not everyone's hearts go up with the same color. Mine has a red background. I'm not exactly sure why, but remember to walk in beauty. Know that you are loved and held in the compassionate embrace of all that is. Kidishte, all is made beautiful. And thank you for tuning in.
Bye-bye.
Hi, if you're enjoying Two Crones and a Microphone, please like this video and hit the subscribe button. Enjoy timeless wisdom from modern times, all served up by women in the know.